I think Solana has a real shot at actually fulfilling the decentralized NASDAQ kind of vision that Totally originally had for the blockchain. They actually have a real shot at being like the on-chain venue for price discovery, not just for Solana native assets, but for any asset in general.
Nothing said on Lightspeed is a recommendation to buy or sell any investments or products. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions, not financial advice or necessarily the views of Blockworks. Our hosts, guests, and the Blockworks team may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. Today I'm joined for our first returning roundup episode, weekly roundup, by Carlos and Ryan Connor from the Blockworks research team. Unfortunately, we're missing out on Dan Smith, who was also supposed to be here today. He's very, very busy heading into breakpoints. So we'll get him on sometime in the next few weeks. But Carlos, Ryan, not my first time having you guys on a pod. Certainly had you over on 0x plenty of times, but here to talk all things Solana today on Lightspeed. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic.
Yeah, great. Excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Short and sweet. Well, I guess maybe just to put a pin in that point, yourself, Dan, and Ryan, I think we'll probably be cycling through you guys for sort of these weekly roundup episodes, talking about what's happening on Solana, the major, changes to the ecosystem, breakout apps, all sorts of things, as sort of the resident kind of sole experts within the Blockworks team. I think today, this is sort of our first roundup coming back, and I wanted to sort of just set the stage a bit for maybe just some future discussions that we're going to end up having on a lot of different topics. So maybe just kick things off with it's been a while since I think we as a group have maybe had some general discussion about Solana kind of publicly on a pod. What are the most exciting things in Solana? What are some of the big changes that are happening, the big shifts that we're witnessing? And I don't know, what are we most focused on today within the ecosystem?
Yeah, I can start with giving a macro view. I think, 2025 in hindsight has been really challenging, despite a huge start to the year with the Trump meme coin and all the activity post kind of regulatory clarity coming from the Trump administration. Price action is very mixed at best, right? We're down at, I think, 140 today. I think the high intraday was 290 on Sol, and that was in January following Trump. So it's been kind of a weird environment, but taking a step back and not getting caught up in the price action, I think, the Blockworks research team has spent a lot of time re-underwriting the Solana ecosystem. And it's just hard to say that much has changed from a leadership perspective. By many measures, Solana remains the dominant chain. There's a lot of talent in the ecosystem. We're seeing a lot of innovation, particularly in the prop AMM space, market microstructure. From an intellectual capital standpoint, you look at what the Anza team is doing, and what's happening in the block builder space and transaction landing, and you can't help but be exciting. And it remains the sole ecosystem that is kind of leading in consumer experimentation, which is really exciting. So, 50,000 foot view is not much has changed. It's still a really bullish environment qualitatively for the ecosystem. And, I think 2026 is going to be, we expected a lot in 25. Perhaps we see that in 2026 with ICM and some other things that have going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with it. I think we are seeing a bit of a vibe shift, if that makes sense, over the past month or so, where in July, when Jito announced BAM, I feel over the following 3 months, following that announcement, there was kind of some exhaustion in the market, particularly in Solana, where it was losing out on perps and it was not seeing much innovation beyond what we've already seen over the past year, pump and whatnot. but over the past month, I'm seeing some positive developments that make me very bullish on the ecosystem overall. I'm thinking, for instance, the day one listing of Monad, them competing with Hyperliquid on spot volumes, the integration with Kalshi that I think we can discuss in more detail later. It feels like they are putting back like the foot on the pedal, and like we are seeing like Solana like coming back as a relevant chain on things beyond just like consumer, and a ton of like DeFi applications that we can obviously discuss that are, in my opinion, quite novel and could be big over the coming months.
Yeah, I think you both make some great points there that tie together. We have seen, a relative decline in, for example, like meme coin trading activity, and obviously that has been pretty core to Sol and the ecosystem success over the past 2.5 years now. So that's obviously a bit of a drag on kind of the market itself. But I think to your point, Carlos, these ideas around one, prop AMMs and kind of like the changing market structure there, as well as like day one trading of certain assets. But basically like this focus on, I think we've heard the tagline of, on-chain NASDAQ or something along those lines. But I think you can see a much cleaner path to a future like that when you actually start attempting that by saying, hey, we're going to try to compete with exchanges and, the hyperliquids of the world by really focusing on, okay, it's not just the memes, like we're going to trade the stocks here. We're going to trade all of the newest and hottest coins here, whether or not they actually like originate on the chain. Maybe getting into that, like obviously prop AMMs have been a pretty core story in development. Like Carlos, I'm wondering if you can just kind of dive into that a little bit, like the change that's been happening. Like for the longest time, we were using DEXs and doing all of our trading through DEXs, and then like the past 6 months completely flipped on its head. So I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, prop AMMs have completely changed Solana's market structure. They are now the dominant way of trading on the Solana ecosystem. I think they account for over 60% of Solana DEX trading volumes, to the detriment of traditional AMMs like Orca, Radium, and Meteora. I was checking volumes recently, and HumidiFi is not only beating every other DEX in terms of Sol USD trading volumes, they are also beating every other centralized exchange. So now they are competing with Binance like toe to toe on a daily basis in terms of Sol USD volume, averaging over $1 billion in volume just for that trading pair, right? They are quoting about 14 other pairs. And I think like for highly liquid assets, prop AMMs will just be the norm, and they will just dominate trading volumes. So it does raises some question like from an investor's point of view. So for what does that mean for like traditional AMMs, right? What does that mean for Ray? What does that mean for Orca? What does that mean? What does it mean for Meteora, right? And what we've seen in on-chain trading volumes is that these DEXs are basically just competing for meme coin volumes. Like any highly liquid asset is just being traded on prop AMMs. And I think we will increasingly see this bifurcation of on-chain volumes between prop AMMs and traditional AMMs based on the maturity of the asset being traded. So the short tail of assets traded by like HumidiFi, SolFi, etc., and then the long tail of assets traded by AMMs. And I think like we still haven't seen like all the experimentation that can be done with prop AMMs. So, for instance, I'm very excited to see if prop AMMs in some way or another can increase the liquidity of xStocks, which you mentioned, and also if they can, in a way, be used for perps, which we haven't really seen yet. We just have seen prop AMMs for spot volumes.
Great points. I'll maybe highlight, we were just chatting internally recently. Sounds like Lifinity is maybe winding down as like a direct sort of response and result of losing trading flow to the prop
Yeah.
AMM. So I think that speaks to your points there.
Yeah, I mean, Lifinity was the original prop AMM, if you want to look at it that way on Solana. They pioneered the idea of protocol on liquidity and adjusting prices based on Oracle prices. Uh, the fact that they are shutting down, and I mean, I'm checking on-chain volumes and they have zero volumes since November 20. So I'm guessing they already shut down operations. The fact that they are shutting down shows how competitive the prop AMM landscape has become and how hard it is to compete today against projects like HumidiFi or SolFi, which have like this expertise in HFT and are just incredibly are quoting incredibly tight spreads that compete with centralized exchanges.
Yeah, and I spoke to Kevin at HumidiFi, I guess when this episode airs earlier this week, about kind of what they're doing, what they're building, how prop AMMs work, but also, they're doing a wet token launch via Jupiter's new DTF platform. I think this kind of ties in, maybe not for the reason that people would hope, but ties into this other idea of, ownership coins, like internet capital markets, better outcomes for like token holders, for example. I'm curious, like, what both of your thoughts are, either one on the wet token or two on like this kind of ownership coin narrative and where that's headed and what sort of changes we're seeing.
Yeah, I can give some thoughts on HumidiFi. Maybe Ryan, you can talk to ownership coins, but HumidiFi is now the top DEX on Solana, both prop AMMs and traditional AMMs included. As I already mentioned, they are just having incredibly dominant since their launch in June. Previously, there was no way for investors to get exposure to the prop AMM meta. If you wanted to express the view of being long prop AMMs, I think the best way to do that was probably be short traditional AMM tokens. With wet on paper, it is the first time that you can actually get exposure to the success of prop AMMs on Solana. However, if you check like the tokenomics of the wet token, in my opinion, they are very disappointing, or at least not a lot has been disclosed about how the token will accrue value. Like, I'm checking HumidiFi's announcement, and it is not clear whether the wet token has any ownership over the prop AMM. It is not clear whether it has any utility beyond being used as a staking mechanism for rebates. And it is not clear why profitable like prop why a profitable institution that's running the prop AMM will need to raise money via an ICO. So those are kind of the high level points. I'm curious if you guys think like the wet token is actually a good way to express that view, or if the token will have like this issue of not being tied to the project success that we've seen over the past few months or years with crypto tokens.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with the token. I know that people will want exposure to this meta. So from like a crypto native or degen perspective, like it makes sense that that there will be demand for that token. I think what I do know about the wet token, it looks like kind of like the FTT model where you stake for discounted trading fees, right? So I'm not an expert on the details, but I've always liked that as a way to add utility to these like DEX or centralized exchange tokens. But you do make a good point that like crypto markets have changed dramatically over the past 24 months with respect to diligence on tokens. The market expects more communication. They expect disclosure and they expect alignment, which is why I think, some of these ownership coins are doing so well right now, and why a lot of tokens over the past 2 months or so are down 70-80%. It's the market's getting kind of fed up with those structures. I'm not saying that is the structure of the wet token. I'm not an expert on it, but you say there are open questions, and like the market now wants those answered. It's not 2021 anymore where you didn't have to answer to anyone. The market's quite demanding now.
Shout out to Peaq for sponsoring today's episode. The machine economy is here. Devices are monetizing data for their users all over the world. Tokenized robots are generating revenue for token holders, and the first machine economy free zone is live in the Emirates. And it's all happening on Peaq, the machine economy computer. Head to peaq.xyz to find out how you can benefit from the age of automation. That's peaq.xyz. Thanks to Sablier for sponsoring today's episode. Sablier is the leading on-chain solution for token distribution, trusted by teams like Maple, Immutable, and Axie Infinity. The #1 distribution protocol on EVM is now live on Solana. Automate your airdrops and token vesting, streamed by the second, transparently and trustlessly. Secure, audited, and ready for Solana builders. Get started at sablier.com. As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions apply. Do your own research. Yeah, maybe leaning into that a little more, Ryan. Like, what are the solutions that I guess in this ownership coin space that are being provided to kind of fulfill the sort of new requirements that the market's asking for now?
Yeah, so I think raising capital in a permissionless environment is tough because it's hard to hold people accountable. The internet in and of itself is fraught with scams, and it's no surprise that crypto is as well. The MetaDAO thing is really interesting because it embeds token holder protections into these launches. So, coming into 2025, you had to think about if you're investing in an ICO, you had to discount that ICO because there's some probability that the team would just stop performing, walk away with the money. It could be an outright scam. And there was nothing, and you never knew the structure. There could be some entity, the equity entity that actually gets rights to the revenue and the treasury where you have none. And, the ownership coin Meta directly tackles those challenges by embedding those rights directly into the token. And you're kind of seeing the success of that model, or at least the demand expressed by the market for coins with protections. I think the MetaDAO team has done an exceptional job of curating the initial ownership coin launches. And, while they're all not up only, which you can't expect them to be. And of course, it's very early on. But if you were to look at the aggregate FTV launch from that platform, it's a good looking chart. And I think that speaks to, the protections in place for investors there, and the lack of a discount rate you have to apply in participating in these launches now, which is cool. Which is something that you need and makes this low cap seed stage ICO thing actually work.
Yeah, what's interesting is it's almost a kind of beating the regulatory forces within the US to the punch a little bit. It's people are asking for more protections and they aren't being provided them kind of either legally or kind of by the market today. And so it's let's just go out and build it ourselves and see if it takes off because people want it.
Yeah, it's this, markets are self-correcting, and a lot of people who doubt markets point to the inefficiencies that they can see in the market and say, haha, I gotcha, markets don't work. But that's not the way to analyze markets. You have to see how they change over time, right? And they're always self-correcting over some time frame. And I think that what the MetaDAO team did is they're this self-correcting force in markets. The other thing that's self-correcting about the market is just what's happening to the low float, high FTV tokens. The market is punishing them. That is the market correcting in real time and sending a signal to new founders, new token launchers that, the games that were played in the past, or maybe not the games that are played, but the deficiencies associated with traditional token launches are no longer okay. So it's cool. It's cool to see markets react, and it's cool to see markets self-correct. I love that. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, I think the high FTP thing is a great point. I think we're seeing, the discourse on CT, for example, crashing out over why do we need a new chain, at its inception at a multi-billion-dollar valuation. This is just, it's something that I think the market and the community keeps asking itself over and over again. We keep getting presented with these types of, options in the market and really not wanting them.
Yeah. And I think, and that's one reason. And as an investor, you try to spec this out, right? It's like, okay, if you have questions that are unanswered by the wet token launch, like the market's going to voice its opinion. It's going to be number one topic on crypto Twitter for, a week or something. And then the team can respond, right? And they can deliver that clarity to the market. So, we'll see what happens with the wet token. I like the team a lot. I think they're really well positioned given all the other products that they're in control of. And it's so impressive what they've done with the business thus far. So you can get that feedback from the market that we don't like your token right now, and maybe things change.
Yeah, there could be a bit of a wait and see and iterate on the design approach here. Sorry, Carlos, were you going to say something?
It happened with Pump too, right? Like the market kind of pushed back and Pump reacted. So, the market's there to provide feedback.
Yeah, I totally agree with the points that have been said. Like, I think like there's ownership coins and there's other ways that people have tried to like signal to the market that they care about the token. Like the Pump is a great example where they had to initiate buybacks because there was no other way that the market would credibly believe them that they cared about the token, right? With Wet, it's interesting that they chose to launch with a 23% float, exactly because of the reasons you've already laid out, Ryan, which is that the market has like verifiably been punishing low float, high FDV tokens. And so it's interesting to see a team that has witnessed that over the past 2 years, especially in the Solana ecosystem where coins like Camino, Giro, Droop have all suffered because of the token dynamics and them choosing to launch with that low float themselves. It will be interesting to see how they intend to like provide transparency to the market as to how the 90% that's distributed across the foundation, team, and ecosystem will be used, because by right now the market is just thinking like 90% is being allocated to the team, because there's no clarity as to who is running the HumidiFi Foundation, and there's no clarity as to what represents the ecosystem. But I completely agree that the market is giving feedback right now, and probably the team is smart enough where they will provide clarity in due time.
Yeah, I do think those are questions that they're going to need to answer, at least for the sake of the token or would-be token holders. At least on the low float, high FDV point, I will say that at least from where I'm standing, like the FDV doesn't appear egregious in this case. At least, like I think 50 and 69 million are the kind of sale, like pre-sale and then public sale FDVs, unless I'm mistaken there.
No, the ICO valuation looks extremely attractive. What I will say is that it will be very hard to get into the ICO because of how it is structured. So 2% is allocated to Droop stakers. I think 6% is allocated to whitelisted addresses. These whitelisted addresses are determined like by the team, like based on like top traders, contributors, etc. And then just 2% is allocated to the public sale on a first come first serve basis. So out of the like 10% that is allocated of the total supply to the ICO, just 2% will be available in the public sale, which I assume it will be oversubscribed because of the valuation. So it will be kind of hard to get in my opinion.
Yep. I think those are all great points. It's kind of a question. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Sale's not live yet over the coming day, today and tomorrow. And then I think the token launches Friday. So we'll kind of see more what that reaction is going into next week. But I think this one's kind of a TBD, toss up in the air. And we'll have to see how the team maybe responds, because I would agree generally with statements made by both of you that there is a good bit of like negativity floating around on this one, at least from kind of the community reactions that I'm seeing. That said, yeah, go ahead.
I do want to, though, I feel like it's a down market. I think a lot of the CT chatter, it's like people are just angry. Like they all own alts. They're all levered and they just lost a lot of money. And I don't know, perhaps the market, perhaps anything that launches right now, or most things that launch right now will be met with skepticism just because of how bad the market's been.
Yeah. Fair point to add. I think, we saw the same with Monad, and it actually did. It went up initially. Not to say the same now, but regardless, those naysayers were sort of incorrect for a few days. To that point, maybe about Monad and even about HumidiFi and Wet, like regardless of what you think about the token itself, at the very least, we are seeing like the Sol ecosystem and these teams lean into this idea of trading of more assets on day one, which you mentioned before. Monad was a really strong example of that, where you had the ability to trade the Mon token on Sol day one of that launch. The prop AMMs were a big piece of the actual volume flowing through that token. I think Dan Smith put out a tweet that it was something like 60 to 80% of the trading volume during that first few days was flowing through prop AMMs for Monad. I think the big thing here is Sunrise DeFi and like the Wormhole team more generally seem to be putting in like a kind of a fresh push, I guess, to like get more assets natively on Sol for trading. This seems like a big deal. I don't know. I think we kind of talked about the, meme coins have kind of been falling off, but we're still seeing, a lot of the trading volume of project tokens and, the L1 assets and like more major assets are fueling a lot of activity through pop AMMs. This feels like an interesting story given the kind of changes to the microstructure of the market. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts here on like this particular direction. It almost seems like maybe somewhat related or even something of a response to like, the lacking of like a strong perp dex, like everyone loves to say. People just like want to trade the hot new assets.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've mentioned it on 0x a few times that, hey, there is some future state where apps really aren't that much on chain and you just actually trade the asset that's associated with the app on chain. And, you see that now that Solana at times is quoting spreads that are tighter than Binance for very liquid pairs. Why not lean into that? If you can own price discovery, you're going to make, from a revenue perspective, you're going to make much more money, having HFT happen on your chain and price discovery happen on your chain than you would if, you have the most successful prediction market app ever launching on your chain, right? Because high frequency traders mean they trade at high frequency and they pay a lot more fees, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see play out. But yeah, the chain should lean into price discovery. It's happening with Solo USDC. Why not have it happen with other assets?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a much bigger deal than people realize. Like, I think Solana has a real shot at actually fulfilling the decentralized Nasdaq kind of vision that Tolly originally had for the blockchain. Like, if you look a year from now, like I really like this anecdote by Marius from Camino, where he was saying that fundamentally Solana should enable trading of any token or any asset, regardless of where it sits natively, right? And a year from now, it was like last year, this was impossible to have because you didn't have like battle tested bridge infrastructure, you didn't have prop AMMs, but like those two variables have matured enough where today you can have any asset on day one on Solana via Wormhole or Sunrise, as you mentioned, Danny. And you can have deep liquidity as well because of prop AMMs, like just providing that and actively monitoring the ranges and updating the prices via oracles. So I think and if you look like at the Moon trading volumes on day one, like Solana actually beat Hyperliquid, and it was just the first time they had done something like this for a like highly anticipated launch. So I think like with xStocks and stuff like that, they actually have a real shot at being like the on-chain venue for price discovery, not just for Solana native assets, but for any asset in general.
It makes a lot of sense too. Like, think of the installed base that Solana has through Phantom. It was very high in the App Store for a long time. I think they had over 20 million MAUs as of January 2025 was the last time they put out that stat. I think MetaMask might have cracked 30 million in 2021, but I would doubt that they're back there today. So if you have that installed base, you have a lot of, and you have very active traders using Phantom and using other Solana infrastructure. It's a real pain to go elsewhere and trade. Like proximity of the application actually matters in crypto. Like there's actually a physical proximity that the new chain has to the Phantom app. It's like many clicks away. So to kind of get close to leverage that installed base for trading new assets, it just makes a lot of sense. And the projects would welcome it. Like Monad wants to see volume on its token. They're happy with that. Solana allows them to achieve higher volumes than otherwise.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add there too, because actually this is a scenario where Phantom actually had Monad as an integrated chain at their launch or near around their launch. But I think when you're looking at a brand new chain, there was very limited liquidity on Monad itself. So it actually made more sense to like trade the token elsewhere, whether that was Solana or Hyperliquid or a centralized exchange, because there wasn't, much on the chain itself as a venue. So that kind of, this type of scenario works in, like a Sol's favor if you're going to do this for every sort of like new launch where you're working with like a kind of an empty ecosystem from the start. Cool. Carlos, you did mention, I like the mention to xStocks. Like, I think that's an interesting lean here. It does feel like there is something of a chicken and an egg problem in the sense that it's like prop AMMs, I think, would be happy to quote and, price these tokens, but at the same time, they need to become big enough in the first place such that it's worth it for them to do so. I don't know if they're currently quoting any xStocks today. My guess would be no, because I'm assuming the on-chain volumes on Solana are still pretty low. But I do think you make a good point that like if they cross a certain threshold of interest, then you could see like kind of a big uptick in that activity thanks to the market structure there.
Yeah, I mean, like what I meant is that technically there's no barrier for Solana to support any asset today. And that is extremely bullish because once demand comes, you can just be ready, like infrastructure wise, like with the prop AMMs, with the bridging infrastructure, like with money market support, etc., for these assets once the demand comes. But yeah, the question is, when will that demand come, like from traders?
I think xStocks are a very underappreciated asset that Solana has, and I mean like strategic asset. The way that it's working out right now is that most xStocks volume is taking place on centralized exchanges. So there's a really good Dune dashboard that we could link to where Solana xStocks are doing like $20 to $60 million. SPL xStocks are doing $20 to $60 million in volume per day. Again, mostly on centralized exchanges. But like why does that matter? Like what it does enable is equity perps. So, you can't get deep liquidity for equity perps unless the makers have the ability to hedge. And hedging in traditional financial market venues comes with a lot of friction because you have crypto assets that trade 24/7, and then you have traditional market assets that have 2-day clearing, and they have 5 days a week trading, only certain hours of the day. So there's a lot of friction there. It's hard to get that off the ground. But Kraken with trading SPL tokens on xStocks could become this venue where you can hedge. You actually hedge your position, or you can move capital in and out quite quickly to enable, better equity market perp structure on Solana, which could be really interesting. So looking forward to see how that unfolds, but generally think the market underappreciates kind of the potential for xStocks to enable ecosystem leadership in Solana in terms of equity perps.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I do think it's interesting how, I would say, quick and eager Kraken has been to like really get into this space. I mean, they just announced that they acquired Backed, which operates xStocks. So, I think, we've seen some of these other, venues like a Coinbase, even Robinhood talk about tokenized stocks offerings, but they haven't been maybe as quick. I think Robinhood kind of has their test product like in the EU, for example, but it's not gone anywhere else besides that. I think Coinbase has maybe just given lip service to this point. I don't think there's any like known kind of products or pre-products out there yet. So clearly, I think Kraken sort of sees, what you see, Ryan, and that there's potentially quite a big and interesting market here, and maybe a way for them, if that becomes like a good kind of connection between crypto itself and then equities trading, and maybe a way for them to like edge out some of their competitors going into the future. Shout out to Peaq for sponsoring today's episode. The machine economy is here. Devices are monetizing data for their users all over the world. Tokenized robots are generating revenue for token holders, and the first machine economy free zone is live in the Emirates. And it's all happening on Peaq, the machine economy computer. Head to peaq.xyz to find out how you can benefit from the age of automation. That's peaq.xyz. Thanks to Sablier for sponsoring today's episode. Sablier is the leading on-chain solution for token distribution, trusted by teams like Maple, Immutable, and Axie Infinity. The #1 distribution protocol on EVM is now live on Solana. Automate your airdrops and token vesting, streamed by the second, transparently and trustlessly. Secure, audited, and ready for Solana builders. Get started at sablier.com. As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions apply. Do your own research. Another kind of tokenized market that is interesting that I think we, in the past, I think we wrote off prediction markets maybe a little bit too much in reference, or maybe in sort of the conversation against other, forms of, if you want to just call it gambling on chain. But they've sort of continued to compound over this past year. And we just saw that Kalshi, for example, just announced their on-chain tokenized products on Solana. So now any Kalshi market can now be traded as like a tokenized asset on Sol. And that's via their integration with DFlow and Jupiter. So what I find really interesting about this is that, Axiom and some of these other trading venues, I thought for a long time, they clearly broke into the space with this, trade meme coins, trade hyperliquid perps, like do it all in one place. It's a clean UX. Like this is great for kind of these consumer traders. It really felt like prediction markets was kind of that other category, and it was really just a matter of time to see that integration. I think we're at this step here now, this change now where that becomes a reality. And I think they actually mentioned Axiom is going to be rolling that out as part of their product. But I think we're seeing like a lot more of these like prediction market terminals, prediction market like trading apps. It's becoming like a much more interesting category. Curious your guys' thoughts, like generally on what we're thinking about prediction markets, where they're going, Kalshi tokenizing things on Solana.
I think that's really interesting what they're doing with DFlow. The composability there, you see that story unfolding. I'm secularly bullish prediction markets. I am cyclically bearish prediction markets at this juncture. I feel like they're so hyped right now. And look, I understand their utility. I understand their usefulness. I think it's really compelling where you can bet on the pure play. So if you were to bet on whether a stock, beats earnings or not, it might beat earnings and the stock goes down. So to be able to have a market where you could express the pure play view, I think is really cool. I think, it's going to eat into media markets. If I read an article where there's where they should obviously talk about prediction markets, if they're talking about some political event and they don't, I churn, because the author's the implication is the author's not being honest with me if they're not going to tell me what the poly market says or what the Kalshi market says, right? However, there's so much hype right now, and there's multi-billion-dollar valuations being tagged to just everything that has the prediction market label, and it's a little worrisome. So I don't know. I can't help but think that TradFi has been a little too prediction market pilled, when the UK and Australia have had prediction markets for a long time, and they never really broke out beyond sports and politics. So you need a lot of volume to come on in sports and politics. Hey, look, probability is the highest that it's ever been with crypto permissionlessness, that you're going to see volume breaking out, and it's going to be more of a global phenomenon. But I think TradFi is way too willing to pump these valuations way too high.
Yeah, I wanted to just add some context to what you're saying, but the note about politics and sports. I'm seeing this chart float around from call sheet data from Dune, but just showing that, the 2024 election was massive, and some other events around that time period were pretty massive for trading activity at that time. And then 2025 has really been all about sort of like becoming the on-chain sports betting app, which I wouldn't be totally dismissive of. Like me personally, I in the past was and have been very bullish like meme coins for the same reason that, I think you can look at lottery numbers every single year going up and up and up year over year. And the same thing goes for the growth of sports betting. It's addictive. They're well-designed games. They get people to press the button and gamble $10 every day. And I think in this case, it's, maybe there's a little bit of a regulatory kind of arbitrage that they're taking advantage of at the moment. But maybe also it's the form factor and the way that the markets are designed, like you mentioned, Ryan, where you can kind of like, if the game is ongoing, I can trade the chart, so to speak, of, maybe I think they're going to win and it looks like it's, all hope is lost, type of thing. So it introduces like some new modes of play, but yeah, to your point, it's tough to see the broader expansion of this outside of sports today when all of the activity is really, really centered around it.
And I'm thinking about like where can I be bullish in prediction markets that the market isn't already. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity around social networks and prediction markets. Betting is inherently social. I only do it really if it's in a social setting. Group chats are really popular with betting, and everyone has their meme coin gambling chat, things like that. So like, could you wrap sports gambling via prediction markets into a social application? Like, yeah, I think there's a lot of room for that. Like we kind of already have that with crypto Twitter, but it's unbundled, right? Like you have Dex Screener over here, you have crypto Twitter over here, and then you have the exchange that you trade on, and then maybe packaging those within a social experience like actually works. But again, I think you want to look at teams that sell into the demographics where it makes sense. You have to land and expand. There's a lot of hope that new demos will be pulled into the prediction market, into prediction market apps. I don't know. It's like kind of, I'll wait and see if that happens. But like, you want to be, I think, selling into sports, and then like, young males who like risking, small denominated amounts on parlay like bets.
Yeah, it is very similar, at least in how I assume the activity is running to meme coins, in the sense that, really targeting probably that same kind of like younger male user, but also this like tendency to want to, put 10 into something and hope it turns into 1,000 or 10,000. I think it really targets that same sort of desired outcome. So it's not surprising to see like that part of this prediction markets pie kind of take off in the near term.
I'm looking at a Dune dashboard where it has a number of different prediction markets breaking out. It breaks out the composition of volume. Crypto is huge. Prediction markets on crypto things for Polymarket. But like culture is still really lagging. It's like less than 10% of volume. Trump is his own prediction market. He has his own category. Yeah, you really have to pick your spots. And it's amazing how Kalshi's basically turned into a sports betting app.
Yeah, I think part of that story as well is maybe the integration with Robinhood and maybe who their target consumer is as well. That's probably because I know that a large chunk of their volume flow has come from them in the past 6 months or so. So that's obviously a big piece of it.
As we're sitting here, yeah, I feel like the bigger bet is like, why do we trade all these different risk markets on different apps? Like why doesn't Robinhood try to eat the whole thing? You already see them trying to do that, but to have a whole unified experience, like why do I have to trade Kalshi and like Kalshi things and crypto things in different places? Like just put it all in one UI.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about the Kalshi integration, like with DFlow, Jupiter, or like the more like generally the builder codes that they put out, is just that people can experiment with it. Like you can now just create your own app and use Kalshi in the back end and see if you can like unify this social trading experience with the prediction markets and see if it sticks. while Kalshi can just focus on like their core product. So I think it's a cool idea to tokenize prediction markets, because it lets people like experiment with it and see if there's actually product market fit for an idea like this.
Yeah, I could totally agree with the sentiment. I feel like we're definitely seeing, Robinhood recognizes there's an opportunity there to kind of put all those things in one place. They're not as relevant in terms of crypto trading volume today. Something I do find interesting, though, is that I think they were, outside of all of the smaller centralized exchanges that exist out there, and maybe for non-US users as well, they were pretty early to add like Hyperliquid as an asset, for example, where we've seen kind of the sexes hesitate maybe to add an asset like that. But I don't know, they've ramped up their activity in listing new crypto assets. And of course, the partnership with Kalshi, which now looks like it might be turning into a Robinhood only venture. I guess we'll have to see where that goes, but they've made an announcement recently that they're leaning more heavily into sort of their own operation of prediction markets as well. So they clearly see the opportunity there as well. I guess I'd love to, if we get back to sort of like what's going on in the Solana ecosystem, I think some of the things that, I don't know if, not necessarily that they've gone by the wayside, but maybe things that we've been waiting for a long time. I'd love to know if like we're seeing movement on things like a meaningful or like highly competitive perps exchange on Solana, for example. This is something that's been talked about a lot. Obviously, Jupiter perps like has been kind of like the dominant venue, but the common kind of discussion point there is that they just have 3 assets. They're not doing the listing of new assets. I know we've talked about Drift at length as well, but we just don't see it in terms of like the market share. We don't see success in terms of market share today. I don't know. Do we see these venues kind of expanding, or new entrants that are coming onto the scene now? Or like you mentioned earlier, Carlos, like are prop AMMs a solution to kind of advancing perps on Sol?
Yeah, I think that the pieces are there for really interesting things to emerge in 2026. The prop AMMs bringing deep liquidity and actually knowing market microstructure better than anyone else, and are probably really positioned to contribute. BAM and ACE allowing perps exchanges to prioritize cancels and create other market microstructure rules to enable efficient perps trading on chain. And then I think, again, xStocks allowing for efficient hedging of exposure. I think the pieces are in place, and you're seeing teams raise, and you'll see them launch in 2026. I think 2026 we'll get some clarity there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the nice thing is you're seeing different approaches to try to make perps succeed on Solana. So while you have things like Jito BAM and Drift is adopting BAM to try to prioritize cancels, you also have other approaches like Bulk, which hasn't launched but is planning to launch in early 2026, I think. You have things like Zeta, which is not really like Solana native, but they're also doing like their own thing with their own like sort of app chain. So I think like different approaches are also great, because it increases like competition, and it just lets the market decide like which is the best approach. And although I am not positive in who will actually end up winning, I do remain like bullish, like generally on perps making a comeback on the Solana ecosystem.
Maybe with that in mind, and I think to sort of close things out here, what do we think? I think there's been talk of upgrades like Fired Answer, kind of like reshaping the kind of throughput capabilities of the chain. Are we seeing the progress there, or is that really still just in the kind of early stages? And what we thought was, hey, coming in 2025 is maybe coming in back half of 2026 or 2027. I'm not clued in on the details there. What does the throughput kind of future look like for Sol? I see a lot of conversation around 1 million TPS someday. What are we actually looking at in terms of performance improvements over the coming year or two? And maybe Carlos, I don't know if you're tapped into this.
Yeah, so it's just IVRL, right? And like what they've been doing for the past few months is just increase bandwidth by increasing like the compute units. I remain increasingly optimistic and increasingly excited about the latency part. So I would love to see block times reduced below the 400 millisecond threshold or the 50 millisecond like shreds. I think that is coming over the next few months, and Solana will increasingly like lead in chain performance. Like if you look, for instance, at the October 10th metrics, like most EVM chains perform really poorly over that weekend or over that like volatility event, whereas Solana was just like continuing working as intended. You obviously saw some volatility, but it performed incredibly, incredibly good and much better than other chains and centralized exchanges. So I do think Solana is the most performant blockchain in production, and we will continue to see improvements heading into 2026. Regarding like the Fire Dancer question, I think that when people were bullish on Fire Dancer, like when the idea initially came out, they were underestimating how much ANSA would make progress with Agave. And we've seen like Agave just made huge strides in performance over the past year. And I remember a few months back, they released a roadmap like the road to 1 million TPS. And I actually think they might be able to make it.
Yeah, I think you make great points there. Like if I pull up even the Fire Dancer reports dashboard, like we see Agave Jito kind of like remaining in that dominant spot, followed by the Frankendancer Jito combination there. And then even Agave and Jito BAM, now that Jito BAM is a thing as well. I guess to your point, would you say it's more of a toss-up or sort of like neck and neck race at this point? Like we may end up in a more of a multi-client environment going into the future. Like it seems surely that there is some interest in adoption for Frankendancer, which is eventually Fire Dancer. But with Agave Anza picking things up, do we see that continuing? And are there even like other clients as well? Like I know the Harmonic block builder, for example, is kind of new to the scene. We could see them maybe take some share away from Jito, maybe shake things up.
Yeah, I think if you had asked me a year ago, I would say Fire Dancer would end up winning the majority of the client share. Today, like because they have taken so long to launch, I think like Ansa and Agave are catching up, and it will be much more close than people think.
Very cool. I think that makes a lot of sense. We're definitely seeing, I think, across the chain, like in every sort of area that we talked about today, a lot more competition than a year ago in many ways, right? We actually had, Pump Fun was like the place, and then we had sort of like the Launchpad wars this year. We're having the Prop AMM wars now. There's so many, obviously there's MetaDAO now, but so many like ICO platforms coming to market as well. And we're just seeing tons and tons of competition over kind of like all these different niches, more so than we have in the past. And to see, new teams come in and try to compete with Jito, which for a long time has been sort of like really like a dominant cornerstone of the Solana ecosystem it's just really interesting to see. And I guess shout out to competition, because I think that's, as users of the chain and the apps, that's good for us to see. It means we get better outcomes in the things that we're using. I guess looking forward, I know next week's Breakpoint, I think Ryan, you're going to be there. I know Dan Smith is going to be there as well. I don't know. Do we just have any like forward-looking thoughts? Like, how are we feeling about Solana ecosystem going into 2026? We kind of talked about what is exciting right now and the changes that are happening, but I guess I don't know if you had to pick one thing or a theme or trend that you're most excited about, or that you're looking forward to kind of like taking over Sol, or propelling it to maybe it's sort of like next stage of growth. What are we really, really interested in?
I think equity perps are the most important thing for any ecosystem over the next 12 to 24 months. I think it's critical. I think it's going to create winners at the app layer and simultaneously at the ecosystem layer. I think it's that big of a deal. So to see when BAM can ship and its adoption, to see, how 00 contributes to reducing latency, and to see how xStocks take off I think is really important.
Yeah. Beyond that, I remain increasingly excited about the maturation of Solana DeFi. I think you're seeing more and more like yield varying stable coins or just like yield varying instruments coming into the ecosystem, and that can really help like things like yield markets prosper on Solana. And you're seeing things like Exponent and RateX really increase in TVL over the past few months, and I think they can be increasingly important players going into 2026. I also remain excited about like net new DeFi applications and things that are actually innovating, not just like the same forks that we've seen over the past 4 years. So things like Hilo, which has like their own um, like decentralized stablecoin model and with high USD and XO. I think maybe it's not like the most institutional thing, but it's certainly an exciting development that's probably worth paying attention to.
Love that. Definitely on the DeFi side. In the coming weeks, I won't spoil who or what or when exactly, but we'll be covering some DeFi teams that I do think like we are going to see some, obviously Breakpoint is a place for announcements from teams. So we'll see, I think some interesting things come out of there. And I am speaking to some teams who will come on Lightspeed in the coming weeks and months, share some big updates that they'll be bringing to market. So I would agree with you, Carlos. There are some interesting things happening in DeFi. I think maybe one point I'll add is that the Trump meme coin, maybe if you had held it from day one to today, you're not very happy. But I think the big impulse that it provided for the Solana ecosystem was that we saw a massive uptick in stablecoin liquidity and sort of like on-chain liquidity on Sol following that event. And so maybe something to just think about is like the maturation of the DeFi ecosystem can lead to, greater usage of this capital that's now just sort of like sitting there waiting to be tapped into. So if it's kind of continuing and expanding out the apps that exist today or building new primitives or kind of like new interesting models, Sol developers, builders can definitely tap into that liquidity that is there now that was not there in prior years. That's really like a new kind of development for Solana generally, I would say. It's almost entering, maybe you would take this in a bad way, but almost entering its Ethereum era where the capital has come on board and it's probably relatively sticky. Like you're not just going to see, 90% of TVL disappear one day, as we've seen with Ethereum, right? It kind of picked up a bunch of capital in the 2021 era and has held on to a lot of it because once it's in, it's hard for it to leave. So I think that's a big positive for Sol going forward and for DeFi.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of stablecoins came on chain. The second most important thing to equity perps, I think, is interesting ways to generate yield. You're not going to get capital coming into your ecosystem if those things can already be done elsewhere. So new sources of yield for crypto natives and new sources of yield to attract TradFi folks. And Carlos brings up Hilo. I think that's a really good example. I think Henri is very interesting as well, a really stable source of yield from reinsurance markets. And you're seeing a lot of interesting experiments there too, like looking at loop scale and exponent TVL, like they haven't moved in this downturn. It's been because there's so much stablecoin liquidity there. It's not tethered to the price of Sol. I think that's really attractive to see that resiliency in this market, and it could be a positive sign for yield markets and stablecoin supply in 2026.
All right. Well, with that, Ryan, Carlos, thanks so much for coming on today. Our first kind of revival roundup episode. The listeners will be hearing from you guys more going into the future. I'll definitely be happy to have you guys on week over week to help me yap about all things Sol for an hour each time. That helps me out a lot, especially Dan Smith. He's quite the yapper. So always great to have him on the show because he'll really just take it and run with it. But yeah, thanks for coming on. This was a great chat today. I think we're going to expand on some of these topics we covered today over the coming weeks because I think there's a lot more to discuss kind of in each of those areas and we can really dig into it. So thanks again. And to the listeners out there, we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
See you at Breakpoint.